Good evening. The fate of Ukraine appears to be reaching crisis point, with Russia expected to launch an all-out assault on the country tonight. Ukraine's main towns have now been hit by as many as 250 missiles, and Russian troops are now on the ground in the city of Kharkiv. Residents, meantime, in the capital, Kiev, are taking cover amid fears Russia could unleash its deadliest weapon.
At the recording of this video, Russia has infiltrated Ukraine, and there is now a brewing war of these two European countries. For months now, if not years, Russia has been preparing for this war. They have sent hundreds of thousands of soldiers from their country to the border of Ukraine in the east. But this is something that has been seen coming for years now. While Russia has been in denial that Ukraine is actually siding with the Eastern world, Russia is now taking drastic steps and using their military advances to infiltrate Ukraine, and now there is a war. Stay tuned to find out what is happening in Ukraine. What is happening in Ukraine is something that is a false truth and a broken history between Ukraine and Russia. At this current time, America is considering to send their own troops down in Ukraine to aid in the war against Russia, and also sending guns and ammunition for the defense of the country. And at this point in time, you must be wondering, why is America so hell-bent on helping out Ukraine in the war against Russia? This is because of one thing: NATO. And I want you to remember that abbreviation because it will play a part in this video further on. So before the war had begun, Ukraine has had its soldiers at the border of the east so that they could prepare themselves when Russia was ready to infiltrate their borders. The Americans at the Ukrainian embassy and their families has been sent back to America, and Britain has removed their frontline non-essential workers in Ukraine. And it was at that point in time that Russia had decided to strike the border of Ukraine. I want to completely explain what is happening in Ukraine and why it is happening. But it won't be easy because this is not the geopolitical type of thing that we are used to that can simply be explained on a map. So for us to understand this, we have to dive deep in the history of Russia and understand why they were a Soviet state and why their Soviet Union was defeated in the 90s. This is the dissected story of why the history of Russia took a set on one mindset of one person there, and that person is Vladimir Putin. So let me get you up to speed on what is really happening. A couple months ago, Russia had sent a couple 100,000 soldiers to the eastern border of Ukraine. This was right before a meeting that a lot of these top countries in the world were attending in Geneva. So at this point in time, a lot of people were curious on why Russia was doing this, and Russia simply explained that it was a military exercise that was taking place for their soldiers. So during the meeting of these countries, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has sent a list of demands to the persons attending this meeting. And everyone was wondering why would he send a list of demands to them during the surge of COVID. But anyways, they listened to the list of demands. The first demand was NATO should stop expanding. So remember when I mentioned this abbreviation in the earlier stage of the video? NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And this is basically a group of countries that are coming to one agreement on military stance. So it was at this point in time they realized that Vladimir Putin was up to something. The second demand was that NATO withdraw all their troops from Eastern Europe. And the final demand was that America should not protect their European allies. So during the meeting, everyone had realized that Russia was making an advance to Ukraine, and if these demands weren't followed, they would invade Ukraine. So the thing about these demands is that it gave us an idea of what Russia really wants from Ukraine. And for you to see exactly what they really want, you will have to understand why Russia is such a big country. So many years before, Russia had started in Kiev, and that is basically modern-day Ukraine. And during this time when Russia was in Ukraine, they started to expand and take other lands and get bigger and bigger. This is the time of the Soviet Union. So now you will see that Ukraine and Russia is basically one country, despite the disagreements they had when it was a Soviet Union. The history of Russia and Ukraine has dated back to many years before we can even understand. So it was around the 1950s and 60s. NATO was formed. And NATO was formed by a group of countries, including Canada, Italy, America, and many more. Their mission was to stop the invasion of Russia to other countries before the Soviet Union took over the world. And by doing so, they went down into Europe and negotiated with European countries for them to join NATO and basically create what they would imagine to be a more peaceful world. So we all know that in 1991 the Soviet Union was brought to their knees and basically collapsed. But a couple Russians did not actually believe in the other countries being an independent country and having themselves to be a republic. And one of these persons was Arbitra. You see, Russia and Ukraine has a deep tie in their roots, and Arbitra had a Ukrainian mother and a Russian father, and he didn't believe that Russia and Ukraine was a separate country because his mother was teaching him about Ukrainian ways and his father was basically singing folk songs of Russians. But there was another person who had strong intentions and feelings like Arbitra, and that person was Vladimir Putin. He believed that Russia had faced something so devastating that he quoted that it was the fall of the Soviet Union was the biggest catastrophe of the 20th century. And I don't know about anyone else, but that isn't the biggest catastrophe of the 20th century. World War I, World War II, etc. So Vladimir Putin was an intelligence officer, and this is why he had a lot of opportunity to speak and be around politicians, thus being him elected as the president for Russia. And he made a post once on a blog, a 10-page post actually, saying how Russia and Ukraine was so connected. And in this post, he spoke about a few things that might catch the eye of a lot of persons. So he was basically saying that these were devastating times because of the countries that were once in the Soviet Union that are now a republic and speaks independence are falling away from their roots, which were tied in Russia. And the most captivating of it was Ukraine to him. So he would think that Ukraine is now being more Eastern world rather than a Russian country where their tradition would live on and their people would grow together. And it wasn't helping the fact that NATO was now taking a lot of the republic countries that were once in the Soviet Union, and Vladimir Putin didn't like this. This is the main reason why we are seeing the war of Russia versus Ukraine right now, because someone still believes in the old ways of Russia and the Soviet Union, and that person is Vladimir Putin. So as usual, thanks for watching this video, and if you have an opinion you would like to share, you can leave it in the comments. This was Concept of the Mind.